Okay, thank you, Professor Julian Tayyib, for your presentation and for the kind introduction. So now we're going to talk about the implementation of biosimilars for metastatic colorectal cancer patients. I'm Dr. Arturo Loaiza-Bonilla, and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Department of Medical Oncology at Cancer Treatment Centers of America in Philadelphia, United States. I'm also the President and Board of Directors of the Global Alliance for Patient Access. And there's my Twitter handle for those who want to follow this conversation online. In terms of a few disclaimers, these are my disclosures as well. So now let's get started with the program. In terms of outline of things that we're going to discuss, includes the introduction to biosimilars and how is the regulatory process overall, including the totality of evidence, how we use bevacizumab in the United States and our personal experience at institutional level with the use of biosimilars and the implementation process. Also, how we switch patients from originator to a biosimilar and which one are the best cases to do so. And lastly, we have a few mention of real-world data information that is going to be presented at this conference, and happy to discuss that as well. So let's just start just with the basic concept. What are biosimilars? So there's a couple of definitions that are very well known over the last few years. The first description is from, the European agency, including as a biosimilar as a biological medicinal product that contains a version of the active substance of an already authorized original biological medicinal product. The similarity itself is compared to the reference medicinal product in terms of several characteristics, including quality, biological activity, safety, and efficacy. And this is all based on a comprehensive exercise that needs to be established in every country. And that's the framework for the EMA to have done this process and how they approve these drugs. In terms of the FDA, the drug agency in the United States, the definition is a little bit different, but it contains the same framework. So it's basically a biological product. It's a highly similar product to the reference one, notwithstanding minor differences in clinically inactive components. And also mention that there should not be any clinically meaningful differences between the biological product and the reference product in terms of safety, purity, and potency of the product. So as you can see, fairly similar differences and components on the definitions between different agencies. But at the end of the day, we just want to look at a product that really doesn't differ much in terms of the key endpoints, including safety and potency. And biosimilars are well established internationally in oncology. This is not a new concept. Many of us have treated a few patients with biosimilars in the past. In terms of the European experience, it's much broader than the United States. Here in Europe, actually, you had in 2007 the first biosimilar approved, which was erythropoietin, approved in the European Union. And since then, a number of new biosimilars have come to market, including most recently, both in the United States and in Europe, the biosimilars for trastuzumab, rituximab, and bevacizumab, which is the purpose of today's discussion. In terms of the regulatory approach to biosimilars, these are the different steps that generate what we call the totality of evidence, which are all those very important steps to establish biosimilarity. So it's summarized here in those 4 steps for your reference. There's non-clinical assessments, which include the analytical characterization and the in vivo studies. And then that's followed by the clinical assessments, which include the clinical pharmacology, like pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And then the comparative clinical study, which is a pivotal phase 3 clinical trial where they're comparing the reference product with the biosimilar and try to demonstrate no clinically meaningful differences between the biosimilar and the reference product. product. That's typically done in a sensitive population of patients, which is patients that would be most likely eligible for the use of either biosimilar or the reference product. And based on those results is what leads to the potential approval based on that information. So once we have followed those 4 critical steps called the totality of evidence, then the indication where this was tested becomes the one that is proven already to be biosimilar. And based on the scientific justification, including the mechanism of action, the pharmacokinetics, immunogenicity, and toxicity profile of the phase 3 clinical trial, we can start considering what we call, extrapolated indications, which is using the biosimilar drug in the same indications that the reference product were used, understanding that we establish biosimilarity in a sensitive population so we can safely use it in other indications as well. And that brings us today to the discussion that we used bevacizumab in the colorectal cancer space, even though the initial indication was in a pivotal study in non-small cell lung cancer. We know now, based on that totality of evidence, that we can use it in our patients with colorectal cancer as well. And this slide here is just to highlight the market development of biosimilars and how there's a dynamic workflow and different forces that are driving the adoption of these drugs. So we have in the market, the reference product, a number of different manufacturers also offering biosimilars, and how price competition, cost sharing, etc., are different forces and stakeholders that drive the adoption of these drugs. For example, insurance, patients, and providers, they'll provide feedback to each other in terms of when to use these different drugs in the right settings for patients. In terms of the estimated cost savings by biological class, we have seen this is something not only exclusive for oncology. In the pie chart, you can see this is also very relevant in the area of rheumatology with anti-TNF products. And the anti-neoplastics is also 13% and over, and also in a multitude of other fields in medicine where we use biologics. From Dr. Mulcahy in 2018, this paper highlighted some of the potential impact on the economic side of this, and estimated that biosimilars can reduce direct spending on biological drugs by $54 billion over a decade, or about 3% of the total biological spending over the same period, with a range that could be from 24 to 150 billion. So once again, depending on the country and the different economical forces, they could be a significant part of the conversation too. So now let's talk about where I practice and our experience in the United States with biosimilars. So I work at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which is a network of 5 cancer-only centers in the United States. We have a national footprint, and of course, because of that, we needed to understand how to use these drugs in the most effective and safe fashion for our patients. We have over 800 physicians and patients traveling from all over the United States. And not only that, but we have an educational component, as we have over 300,000 calls per year and over 30 million unique visits to our website. So we need to make sure that anything that we discuss with our patients is focused on the best available information for their treatments. So we were founded about 30 years ago. We are focused on what we call the mother standard of care, and because of that, we're a direct to patient center, and in using that approach, we have been able to reach 13 to 15,000 patients per year. And as we were analyzing our patient population, we found over 500 patients per year eligible for the use of bevacizumab, and hence moving the needle forward on the conversation on how we adopt biosimilars for our patients as well. So in terms of institutional drivers for the adoption of biosimilars, this is probably also very close to many other centers in the US and across the world. The first one was, prompted by an approval, which is the most organic way for this to happen. Not only that, but we had to learn how the biosimilars fit with what we call treatment pathways, which is ways that we treat patients in a uniform fashion. So, we have a national footprint of multiple hospitals. We need to make sure that all the institutions are working aligned on the same products. We are also driven by certain mandates by payers. And for those that are not in the United States, we have different value-based care and alternative payment models. So, for example, one of them is the oncology care model, and others called as MACRA or MIPS, which are basically that you get a certain amount of allocation of money for treating this patient, and you have to find the best way to treat this patient in the most safe, effective, and cost-effective fashion, so the health system remains healthy, and at the same time, we treat the patients appropriately, and that brings cost and benefit revenue considerations. And as an example of payer-mandated change, this is publicly available information from United Healthcare. We get these bulletins often on our inboxes and our emails, and working with pharmacy, where they change policy over time, and they recommend certain drugs in order to prevent denials and to provide coverage for certain biologics. In this example, they are mentioning the use of bevacizumab and trastuzumab biosimilars, and when the policy changes, so we have to be in the lookout for this. And of course, that drives further adoption of biosimilars, because if that's what's going to get reimbursed, then we need to understand better how to impact that on our practice and our patients. And to date, we started with the growth factor support biosimilars, because those were the first approved in the United States. Then over time, with new approvals and changes, we have to really dig deep into the conversation from a multidisciplinary team about the use of bevacizumab, trastuzumab, and rituximab, which are, disease-modifying agents for a multitude of malignancies, and how to use it best for all of our patients and practices. In terms of the landscape in the United States for the use of biosimilars of bevacizumab, you can see here that there has been a significant uptick over the last 6 months of over 21% of the market by the use of bevacizumab biosimilar. And this is not just for one indication. It's about 2/3 of the patients are treated with biosimilars for colorectal cancer here. And the second most commonly used indication is gynecological cancer, followed by other indications as well. So now that we established that we are using biosimilars and they're here to stay, we needed to find ways to implement it. So the first thing was look for the potential benefits and opportunities perceived. So as I mentioned, we had about 500 patients that were potentially eligible for this. So we gather, a meet of the minds with a multidisciplinary group, including clinical leadership, in this case, medical oncologists. We also brought pharmacy, nursing, so they understand issues related to infusion and whatnot, and also individuals from revenue cycle management, so we can understand insurance coverage and anything related to cost-benefit ratio. So there was a learning curve, which we have adapted now to other biosimilar discussions. So the first 3 components were identifying barriers to adoption. So first, if there was any reluctance from healthcare providers and professionals in terms of the use of these drugs. Second, addressing concerns from non-clinical staff. And of course, very important is addressing any concerns for patients and looking for the best approach to address these barriers. In terms of healthcare professionals, we found that a very good way to do it in a scientific, unbiased fashion was having pharmacy leading the program at our institution for the education of healthcare providers, so improve understanding and confidence biosimilars, showing the concept of totality of evidence and how these indications came to be approved. In terms of non-clinical staff, kind of finding out the specific concerns regarding, reimbursement, issues with consent for them to, if they were transitioning to from a reference product to the biosimilar, and the process that needs to take place. And for patients, two things we found important was, one, the consistent and confident messaging that had to be emphasized, and transferring that confidence from our end to that we feel well informed and empowered to the patients, because at the end of the day, they had to understand that we are comfortable with the change too. And this is nothing new. Actually, it's validated by other efforts. Something that I wanted to highlight is like a well-informed and confident healthcare provider speaking with a uniform voice and actually feeling confident about the change that transfers the confidence to the patient and avoids any negative, avoiding excessive focusing on negative effects or just going to the data and showing that there's no differences between the reference product and the biosimilar. Joint decision with them, include them in the conversation, and empathic attitude, and make sure that there's no conflicting messaging across stakeholders, because that's important too. And this is consistent with the framework from the One Voice approach from 2018 and published in Biodrugs. Education is very important, so there's a number of resources that you can tap, including from the FDA, the EMA, the European Commission, and the International Alliance of Patient Organizations that we have been available for patients to read. Of course, there's also going to be some resources from biosimilar manufacturers that you can go online and share with patients. So this timeline here is showing us how we did it. So we started a prioritization process to make sure that we were aligned with any potential reimbursement. Then any new regimen patients were started on biosimilars once we introduced the biosimilar to the practice. Those who were transitioned from the original product to the biosimilar, particularly those who were on the insurance authorization expiration date and we needed to renew it, then we reconsented those patients. And at the end of the whole process, about 6 months later, all of our patients were able to be on the biosimilar. These decisions were required about whether to switch patients or not to biosimilars, and we found that using the extrapolation data, it made sense for many of them. We did the reconsenting process as a precaution. Although the patients had already consented to the use of bevacizumab itself, we wanted to be very transparent. So there was buy-in and understanding of the approach we're doing. About 5% of them refused to switch, and 100% of new patients were started on biosimilar, once again emphasizing the importance of the messaging and the confidence from the providers. And following switch, patients remain at the 30-minute infusions per pharmacy advice, so we didn't change any of that. It's not that we just went back to square zero. We continued the patient as if they were on treatment. In terms of safety signals, we look for any incidents of infusion-related reactions, tolerability as a whole, any issues with insurance denials as well, which we thought was important as part of the financial toxicity that we call as well. We compare captured data versus historical data from the reference products, and so far we haven't found any differences in safety profile data. Things to consider is that were there any costs realized, was there any savings, of what do you do with those funds, and I think there is a different reality in every different institution and country. So of course, questions that you should formulate as you are following the adoption of biosimilars in your practices. In terms of real-world data, this is being presented in the World GI Conference as well this year in 2020, data from Concerto Health AI showing from a multitude of community oncology settings that you can use the biosimilars in the United States in the same way as we're managing patients with the reference product. And this is represented across multiple biomarkers and different lines of treatment as well. In summary, biosimilars have a robust approval process and have been successfully used for many years. Since the launch of biosimilar bevacizumab in the United States, we have pretty good uptake with over 20% of the market within 6 months. most treatments has been in colorectal cancer in the metastatic setting, as mentioned. And the successful implementation of this biosimilars require prior planning, installation of confidence in the healthcare team, and confidence that is transferred to those patients as well for adherence, compliance, and adoption. I would like now to pass back to Professor Mark Peters for him to close the symposium. Thank you so much for your attention.